The House will please come to order. I would like to welcome everybody to the 32nd day of the session, Friday, February 24th, 2023. Today in history, February 24th, 1941, the 115th Cavalry Regiment, Wyoming National Guard, is inducted into federal service. Thought that was interesting. And with that, Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Convening roll call for the 32nd day, February 24th, 2023. Alamand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Clouston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haraldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Warnock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermueller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? Speaker Summers?
Here. Chief, leave that roll open. We'll see if Representative Lawley comes in. So today, our prayer of the day will be done by our very own Representative Jennings. Please rise.
Let's pray. Sovereign God, we thank you that you take notice of the happenings of human and of your creation. We thank you that you're the creator of all things. And we thank you that you take interest in the things that we do. We pray that today we would come before you with a humble and repentant hearts for things that we do or say outside your will. Pray that we'd be ever mindful of the price that you paid for coming and redeeming us from sin. We pray that you would take note in our workings today, that we would have the mind of Christ in everything that we say and do to others, and for those people back home that we represent, that we would do that in a favorable way before you. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Thank you, Representative Jennings. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The House will please come to order. Chief, would you please finish the roll call?
Lawley. 62 present.
All right. Journal committee report. Oh, just a second. Before we do that, there's a couple of privileges, so I think I'll get them over with now. Representative Larson, JT, privilege,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privilege of the floor.
please.
Okay, so please hold your applause until I'm finished here. Okay, so today we are joined in the gallery upstairs by members of the Wyoming Arts Alliance and their Cultural Champions Network. Cultural Champions are a multi-generational network of arts and culture leaders from both tribes from the Wind River and every county in Wyoming who convene to learn from each other and help Wyoming Arts Alliance improve the environment for the arts and culture in their local communities. You will see them around the Capitol, and you are invited to meet them all today at the Wyoming Arts Alliance Cultural Recognition Luncheon in Conference Room 5354 in the Capitol Connector, and tonight at the Governor's Arts Awards. Please give them a big Wyoming House of Representatives welcome in the South Gallery. Yay!
Wyoming Arts Alliance, welcome to the House. You guys do some amazing things in our communities, and we appreciate it. Representative Chairman Northrup,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privilege of the floor.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I get to introduce my own doctor from Powell, Wyoming, Dr. Michael Tracy. Welcome to the House.
Hey!
And Mr. Speaker, second privilege, if I could.
Please.
The nurse of the day is Heather Roberts. Please welcome Heather.
Hey! Representative O'Hearn, do you have a privilege?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privilege of the floor.
Please.
We would be remiss if we did not sing happy birthday to one of the best singers on the floor. On the opposite end, it's his birthday on Sunday, and we won't be here. Landon Brown shares a birthday with Johnny Cash. So there's his birthday.
Hey! To you, happy birthday to you. Hey, dear Landon, happy birthday to you. Wow, I think that was a particularly good rendition of Happy Birthday to You. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, privilege?
Yes, sir. I would genuinely love a privilege of the floor.
Please.
Members of the 67th, it is my great honor and privilege to tell you a little bit about somebody that's one of the most important people in my life. He just stepped into the back of the room, him and his lovely wife and his family. And I want to tell you a few things about the gentleman before I have him recognized by the body. So if you will indulge me a few moments of your time, I'd like to tell you a little bit about somebody that has a greater impact than we even can imagine in this wonderful state we call Wyoming. I was told once by a representative that I dealt with when I was serving on House Education, the good Representative Paxton, that if you were to take the 10 most important people in your life and add them up, that at least one of them would be a teacher. And I would challenge all of you to think about that. Well, this morning, I would like to recognize, I can't even look at you, Mr. Stoltz, because you make me want to cry. In our gallery to the west is probably one of the most influential men in my life. And not only my life, but this gentleman touched the lives of so many young people that he had the opportunity to sow into. And I've never been more blessed than have the opportunity to be able to have Tom Stoltz in my life. Tom Stoltz was our FFA advisor in Hewlett, Wyoming from 1976 until 1988. And in his career and his tenure, through that time, he received the Wyoming Honorary State FFA degree in 1983. He had American Farmer degrees in Wayne Wilson. He had a State Star Farmer degree in Wayne Wilson. He had 5 state officers that served in the Wyoming FFA. Deb McCamus, Tracy Claycomb, Wayne Wilson, Jerry Rathbun, and Bill Pannell. 5 state officers. Also at that time, he had 2 state sweethearts. Now that's not easy to do. He also had a state creed speaker, and that just so happens that was me. In 1976, he put together, and beginning at that time and through 1989, he formulated and he drew up and he forwarded to our nation 22 state farmers. An incredible feat. Not to mention the fact that he was blessed with the ability to be able to marry Marilyn Stoltz, who is the love of his life, all of his life, and has been beside him through everything. Mr. Stoltz challenged us to be the best possible human being we could be. And he and my dad did not get along. Because he helped my dad understand what FFA really meant. FFA does not mean Future Farmers of America. FFA means Father Farms Alone. Because when we started into FFA, that man drug us all over the state of Wyoming. And he taught us, and he showed us, and he sowed into our lives, and he challenged us to be responsible, respected men and women that would go forward and be producers and provide. Not only for this state, but for this nation. He loved us kids. And he made us learn. He held us accountable. And he sowed into us the things that I so appreciate about what the state stands for. And I saw in the recognition of his life and everything that he'd done. He raised 3 children, 3 boys. Scott, their oldest, is currently the superintendent in Sheridan County, one of the top performing districts in the state of Wyoming. His son, Doug, was a bank president for 2.5 years here in Cheyenne with Pinnacle Bank. He also was I'm no jealouser in this, but he was one of the guys that worked for Cabela's as one of their sportsmen. I mean, and he also owns the office. If any of you have been to the office, Tom and Marilyn's son owns the office and BMO's here in Cheyenne. Their youngest son was a year older than I am, was Bill. And I'm going to have to read Bill because his information here is as long as your arm. He said, Bill was a 3-time state champion wrestler. Graduated from the University of Wyoming, and he's now William Stoltz at Gateway Chiropractic in Loveland, Colorado. He's a doctor, and he taught as well. So I just hope you guys recognize and realize that you have an opportunity and you have greatness in your presence this morning. Your senator, president of your Senate, was the president of his chapter in Ogden Driscoll. This man has sowed into the lives and has changed the lives and transformed the lives of so many people, I can't even begin to tell you. He is a blessing, and it is an honor to know him. And he just turned 90 years old a few weeks ago. And so, ladies and gentlemen of the 67th Wyoming House Legislature, I would like to introduce to you Tom Stoltz and his lovely wife, Marilyn, and his family in our West Gallery. If you would please recognize them with some applause. Thank you, Ms. Stoltz. Thank you, everyone.
Welcome to the House. We really appreciate all you've done for all those children in your area. What a great program, and obviously what a great man. With that, do we have any privileges yet? And I think we're going to roll into a couple of things before we have them. There'll be a motion right before third reading, but I think we're going to do Journal Committee report next.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of February 23rd, 2023 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Chestick and Ward.
Reports from standing committees.
Senate Joint Resolution 11, sponsored by Senator Larson Dan. Convention of States. A joint resolution requesting Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments to the United States Constitution as specified. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 3 Revenue, to whom is referred Senate Joint Resolution 11, Convention of States, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Byron, Harshman, Northrup, Oakley, Zwanitzer. Noes. Representatives Bear, Locke, Storer, Strzok. Representative Harshman, Chairman. Senate File 101, sponsored by Senator Ide. Wyoming Legal Tender Act Amendments, an act relating to Wyoming Legal Tender Act. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 3 Revenue, to whom is referred Senate File 101 engrossed, Wyoming Legal Tender Act Amendments, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Bear, Byron, Harshman, Locke, Northrup, Oakley, Storer, Strzok, Zwanitzer. Representative Harshman, Chairman. Senate File 109, sponsored by Senator Salazar. Prohibiting chemical abortions, an act relating to abortions. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 3 Revenue, to whom is referred Senate File 109, prohibiting chemical abortions, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Bear, Harshman, Locke, Northrup, Oakley, Strzok, Zwanitzer. Noes. Representatives Byron and Storer. Representative Harshman, Chairman. Senate File 167, sponsored by Senator Nethercott. Domestic Violence Protection Hearings, Remote Appearance, an act relating to domestic violence protection. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 1 Judiciary, to whom is referred Senate File 167 engrossed. Domestic Violence Protection Hearings, Remote Appearance, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Chestick, Crago, Haroldson, Jennings, Nemec, Oakley, Provenza, Rodriguez-Williams, Washit. Representative Washit, Chairman. Senate File 152, sponsored by Senator Pappas. Occupational Therapist Criminal History, an act relating to criminal history records. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 1 Judiciary, to whom is referred Senate File 152, Occupational Therapist Criminal History, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Chestick, Crago, Haroldson, Nemec, Oakley, Provenza, Rodriguez-Williams, Washit. Representative Noes, Representative Jennings. Representative Washit, Chairman.
Is that it? All right. You know, one cleanup from yesterday, we were kind of in a rush at the end, and when we signed enrolled acts, I usually always try to recognize the individual whose enrolled act I'm signing. And there was an enrolled act, I didn't know whose it was, and I want to recognize that person now. So Representative Stivars, I believe it was House Bill 67, got signed in yesterday, and I think we ought to all give him a little congratulations. And my apologies for not getting it done at the right time. And with that, I believe Representative Andrew has a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the motion of the ocean, which is to take from the desk Senate File 143 in accordance with Mason's Section 493.
So, based upon, just, I'll stand at ease for a second. I need to get my rule book. So Representative Andrew, I'm going to rule that motion is out of order. Our rules trump Mason's on our manual. And not only that, we have a specific rule that says 4-7B, for sessions of the 67th House of Representatives held in calendars 23, 24 only, the Speaker shall have the authority to determine whether to introduce and refer a bill to committee. If the Speaker refers a bill to a standing committee, the House may, on motion, refer the bill to another standing committee. So in order to get a bill out of my drawer, you have to suspend 4-7 subsection B, and that's how I'll rule. Representative Andrew,
Mr. Chairman.
you want to object to my ruling?
Um, Mr. Speaker,
Please.
I'd like to call a Rules Committee.
Rules Committee to the front. All right, so after the Rules Committee met, it was fairly unanimous that, and I agree, that his objection should be overruled, that our rules take precedence over Mason's. And so that is the ruling from the chair. Obviously, the bringer of the motion can appeal to the body the ruling of the chair. So Representative Andrew, what would you like to do?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Rule 8-4, I would like to appeal the ruling of the chair.
So that motion is debatable? So that motion is debatable, but it's debatable only on the merits of the appeal. So Representative Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Section 493 of Mason's states that when there are matters at the desk concerning which no action has been taken, that a member desires to have considered, a motion may be made for that purpose. The motion may not be made when other business is before the House. A majority vote is only required, and this motion is not subject to any subsidiary motion. Mr. Speaker, this motion allows us to pull this bill from the desk. We are not referring it to any committee. We are not committing it. House rule, the rule that we're concerned about, 4-7, it does not apply in this situation because we are only trying to remove it from the desk at this point.
Okay, anyone else first time? Mr. Speaker, for your first time?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, for your first time?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. You know, I think clearly in Rule 4-7B, for the sessions of the 67th, and I've read it already, the Speaker shall have the authority to determine whether to introduce and refer a bill. Introduce means to pull out of the desk, and to refer a bill. It's either in my possession or it's not. And in order to get it out of my possession, you have to suspend Rule 4-7B. And so that's my case.
Anyone else first time? Mr. Speaker Pro Tem Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, on and against the appeal for the additional reason that we have a constitutional requirement, Article 3, Section 23 of the Wyoming Constitution, that no bill shall be considered or become a law unless referred to a committee, returned therefrom and printed for the use of the members. So the constitutional requirement that it be referred to a committee, combined with our rule that the Speaker has the authority to, sole authority to refer to the committee, the combination of those implies that this take from the desk motion must be read in connection with that. So you can't just take it from the desk to the body. It would have to go to a committee. And once it has to go to a committee, then our rule kicks in about the Speaker's authority to refer to a committee. So on and against the appeal.
Anyone else first time? Okay, seeing none before the bringer, we're going to move to second time for the bringer of the appeal. Anyone second time? Okay, to the Representative Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are trying to pull this from the desk. I have not heard any proof that has been provided that referring it to a committee and bringing it from the desk are one and the same. I do have a motion following this, if this passes, to take care of what we need to do beyond that, but we need to vote on this motion first.
Okay, we're voting on the appeal, Rule 8-4. Now, let's be clear, we're going to do a voice vote. If you vote aye, you rule in favor of the appeal. If you vote no, your vote will go with the speaker, his ruling that it was out of order. So once again, we're going to take a voice vote. Aye, you're with Representative Andrews' position. No will be at the speaker's position. Okay? All those in favor of the motion on 8-4 on the appeal, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. That motion has failed. Or other motions? Okay? Mr. Speaker.
We're at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading consent list consisting of the following Senate files: Senate File 52, Senate File 53, Senate File 56, Senate File 67, Senate File 98, Senate File 107, Senate File 113, Senate File 128, Senate File 154, and Senate File 157.
Would anyone like to remove any of these bills from the consent list? Representative Brown.
Mr. Speaker, I would move pursuant to House Rule 7-3 to lay back Senate File 107 for one additional day, please.
Without objection, Senate File 107 will be laid back one day. Anybody else like to remove anything from the consent list? Will the reading clerk read the bills on the consent list?
Senate File 52, sponsored by Education. School Finance, Special Education Funding, an act relating to school finance being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 53, sponsored by Transportation. Wyoming National Guard Medical Insurance Premiums, an act relating to Defense Forces and Affairs being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 67, sponsored by Senator Schuler. Multi-purpose vehicles, disabled license plates, an act relating to motor vehicles being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 56, sponsored by Judiciary, prohibiting travel across private land for hunting purposes, an act relating to game and fish being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 98, sponsored by Senator Barlow, Education, Certificate of Completion, an act relating to education being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 113, sponsored by Senator Pappas, Architects Practice Act Amendments, an act relating to professions and occupations being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 128, sponsored by Senator Hicks, Transfer of State Lands Exchange, an act relating to state lands being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 154, sponsored by Senator Cooper, Energy Authority Project Financing Refineries, an act relating to the Wyoming Energy Authority being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 157, sponsored by Senator Cooper, Weed and Pest Mitigation, Tribal Inclusion 2, an act relating to weed and pest control being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the House? The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Ellamand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos. Banks. Bear. Berger. Brown. Burkhart. Byron. Chadwick. Chestick. Clauston. Conrad. Crago. Davis. Eklund. Harrelson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hornock. Jennings. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nemec. Northrup. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith. Storer. Strock. Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washut. Western. Winter. Wiley. Yin. Zwanzer Dan. Zwanzer Dave. Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 52, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 53, are there any changes? Davis, aye to no. Hornock, aye to no. Henn, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Strock, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Harrelson, aye to no. Ward, aye to no. Ottman, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Allemand, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 47 aye, 15 no. As for Senate File 56, are there any changes? Hornock, aye to no. Yin, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Strock, aye to no. Singh, aye to no. Allemand, aye to no. Provenza, aye to no. Chestick, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 54 aye, 8 no. As for Senate File 67, are there any changes? Hornock, aye to no. Penn, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Further changes? Ottman, aye to no. Further changes? Allemand, aye to no. Further changes? Locke, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 55 aye, 7 no. As for Senate File 98, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Allemand? Are there any changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 113, are there any changes? Jennings? Aye to no. Stivar? Aye to no. Slagle? Aye to no. Smith? Aye to no. Strzok? Aye to no. Bear? Aye to no. Oh. Allemand? Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 55 aye, 7 no. As for Senate File 128, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 154, are there any changes? Hornock? Aye to no. Andrew? Aye to no. Further changes? Further changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 60 aye, 2 no. As for Senate File 157, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 62 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate Files 52, 53, 56, 67, 98, 113, 128, 154, and 157 have passed the House. We are now at that order of business of bills on third reading regular list. And I believe there was some bills that Chairman Zwanitzer.
According to Rule 7-3, I'd like to lay back Senate File 96 one day.
Could you repeat that bill number?
Senate File 96.
Without objection, Senate File 96 is laid back one day. Representative Walters.
Mr. Speaker, according to House Rule 7-3, I request to lay back Senate File 137 for one additional day.
Without objection, Senate File 137 will be laid back one day. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In accordance with House Rule 7-3, I would like to lay back Senate File 131 one day.
Representative Western, I didn't get that bill number because I didn't think I had
Mr.
that
Chairman,
on.
that was Senate File 131.
Okay. Without objection, Senate File 131 is laid back one day, which is great because that wasn't on my list anyway, so. Thank you. Anybody else? Representative Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Per House Rule 7-3, I move to lay back Senate Joint Resolution 3 for one day.
Without objection, Senate Joint Resolution 3 is laid back one day. Anyone else? All right. The first bill for our consideration will be Senate File 79.
Senate File 79, sponsored by Senator Baldwin. Plan of Safe Care Newborns, an act relating to public health and safety being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We have amendments. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 79 and ask for your favorable consideration. So if you'll go to page 4 in your bill, The amendment is basically to remove subsection F, so lines 17 through 22. After further discussion with other members of the body, it seemed most favorable that some of the confusion that this section brings in would just be better dealt with this seemingly unnecessary. Because this is already in statute, this is more of just a comment, and therefore it's not necessary in this bill. So I would ask for your favorable consideration.
All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 79 signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 79 has been adopted. Senate File 79 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Ellerman? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Klauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Warnock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washit? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanitzer Dan? Zwanitzer Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 47 aye, 15 no.
Senate File 79 having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 79 has passed the House. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 100.
Senate File 100, sponsored by Senator Barlow. Designation of spouses, revocation upon divorce or annulment, an act relating to wills and probate being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
It has amendments. Representative Chestick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand before you today with a little bit of egg on my face.
Representative Chestick, please move that
I'm
amendment.
sorry. I would like to move third reading amendment to Senate File 100 and ask for your favorable consideration.
Is that third reading amendment number 1?
Yes, third reading amendment number 1. I stand here with a little bit of egg in my face. In your committee number 1, I have, because of the courses I teach at the law school, I teach legal writing courses. I have claimed the role of grammar police, and I'm here to correct a mistake that I made that was a grammatical error. So I apologize for taking up the time. I do thank the good chairman of committee number 1 for pointing out my grammatical error, but all this does is it changes the words to seek on line 4 of my second reading amendment to from seeking. It's simply a grammatical change and does not change the intent of the amendment whatsoever.
Question being called. All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 100 signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 100 has been adopted. Senate File 100 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Ellerman? Allred? Andrew? Angelos. Banks. Bear. Berger. Brown. Burkhart. Byron. Chadwick. Chestick. Clauston. Conrad. Crago. Davis. Eklund. Harrelson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Warnock. Jennings. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nemec. Northrup. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith. Storer. Strock. Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washut. Western. Winter. Wiley. Wiley. Yin. Zwanitzer Dan. Zwanitzer Dave. Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? Warnock. Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 50 aye, 12 no.
Senate File 100, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 100 has passed the House. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 116.
Senate File 116, sponsored by Senator Dockstader. Protection of lawful commerce and firearms, an act relating to civil procedure being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Representative Zwanitzer Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 116 and ask for your favorable consideration. This amendment is exactly like it was yesterday, except we just put 2 years. So if you have knowledge of gunsmithing for the last 2 years, I had a lot of input. That was the main concern. But if you go to school and get a gunsmithing degree, that would obviously fall under this, and I'd ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you.
All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 116 signify by saying aye. All those opposed? No. The chair is in doubt. All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 116, please rise. Perfect. Thank you. All those opposed, please rise. Less than 43. You know, it seems like all the voice we had yesterday just left on that vote. So encourage a little. I'm not going to encourage too much because I've seen that happen too. So Senate File 116 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll. And third reading amendment number 1 has been adopted.
Alaman. Allred. Andrew. Angelos. Banks. Bear. Berger. Brown. Burkhart. Byron. Chadwick. Chestick. Clauston. Conrad. Crago. Davis. Eklund. Harrelson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Warnock. Jennings. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nemec. Northrup. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith. Storer. Strock. Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washut. Western. Winter. Wiley. Yin. Zwaniter Dan. Zwaniter Dave. Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye.
Senate File 116, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected at the House, Senate File 116 has passed the House. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 140.
Senate File 140, sponsored by Senator Pappas. Building code requirements, refrigerants, an act relating to public health and safety being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to move third reading amendment number 1 to House or Senate File 140 and ask for your favorable consideration. So members, this just adds the word new in front of equipment in this bill, and I'll tell you why I'm just a little concerned about that. I think that this just helps ensure that there's no confusion, and we clarify that we're not dealing with old equipment on this. Old equipment takes a lot of servicing. You have to recharge that equipment often. In this bill, we're dealing with new refrigerants, we're dealing with new equipment. So that's kind of what I just want to make sure we're specifying here. And, you know, I think that if this word isn't necessarily there, then it could be construed that if you have to service old equipment, you have to come in and replace it with new equipment. But that's not the case. We don't want that to be the case. Old equipment runs just fine if it's kept serviced. We do want to make sure that you know these new refrigerants and things that are better for the environment. A lot of times they're propane based. I think this kind of helps clarify that we're just dealing with the new stuff, not necessarily anything you have to service, so that we still allow the service side of this. Thank you.
Chairman Olson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just urge you to resist this amendment. Excuse me. I would urge you to resist this amendment. We heard substantial testimony in the Corporations Committee, particularly from people in the industry, and this wasn't a concern that they had. So it always makes me a little nervous when we get to third reading and we start trying to make amendments to the bill. And when we do that, we've got to be certain that we know what we're doing. And one of the ways that can become kind of risky is when we go counter to what we heard in a committee or testimony we heard in a committee. And I really think this runs afoul of the testimony that we heard in committee. So I'd urge you to resist it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative O'Hearn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, the first line in page 1, an act relating to public health and safety. These new refrigerants are made to, as the previous speaker or the bringer of the amendment stated, some of this existing equipment would be, it wouldn't be used in that. And it's for existing equipment. So if we put in new, it takes out all the existing equipment that this stuff was built for. And it would preclude any old existing equipment to be upgraded. On and against the amendment for the bill.
Chairman Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a question for the bringer. At what point does a piece of equipment no longer constitute new equipment? Do we authorize the new refrigerants or these new chemical substances for use in new equipment? A year later, is it still new equipment?
Representative Henderson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, members, I don't think we need to take up too much time. I'm a supporter of the bill, and I don't have a problem with one additional word. I would note that, this equipment is designed with the refrigerant in mind. And so the equipment's going to require what it requires. And I think anybody involved with that is going to do their best to make sure it has the right stuff. So I would urge a no vote and a yes on the bill. Thank you.
Representative Penn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just have a question, I guess, on, is some of what would be be under the definition of old equipment still able to use the new refrigerants, or are the new refrigerants not interchangeable with the old refrigerants? Thank you.
Chairman Brown for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just, I guess, a quick question as I'm trying to read in the implications that this would have on what we referenced 42 USC 7671K, which is, I started looking that up and kind of looking into the safe alternatives, what the implications of that would be by saying that only federal rules promulgated to that shall not be prohibited or regulated by any code or ordinance, only on new equipment. How does that potentially run afoul with other codes that we might have that do require older equipment to, when they're recharged or they're remanufactured or anything along those lines? How would this coincide with that? More just a question. I'm hoping that the good bringer of the amendment can clarify that only new equipment would be subject to these regulations. But if we have a rebuilt, I'm thinking, one of the coolers at one of our favorite grocery stores or something like that gets rebuilt and reutilized, just how the implications on something like that would be for our businesses that operate these types of equipment. Thanks.
Representative Larson JT for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First for a second.
Anybody else? Representative Ottman. Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I as well heard this in committee, and while I know that things need to be upgraded and we're all about environment and especially with refrigerants and stuff, one of the concerns that I did have was that if you have an existing, say an existing restaurant or an ice cream store or anything like that, and you need repair, rather than having to go out and totally repurchase every bit of equipment, I believe this amendment would enable people to do that. When we're going into new facilities and new equipment, then that would be the purchase. But oftentimes, what I'm afraid that the bill will do without the amendment is not enable people to get repair parts, that they will be obsolete. So I would just ask your consideration on this. Thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the bringer of the amendment? Representative Hornock for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I think let me try to answer some of those questions or just explain what's going on here. And there's a little bit of concern that I have that by enacting this with this type of, unless you're specifying new equipment, that there will be a potential problem with servicing the existing equipment, because the refrigerants aren't really, one piece of equipment can't take the new refrigerant. So that's the concern. The federal government is always updating their standards, their regulations, what you can and can't use, especially in the refrigerant for environmental reasons. And our code books don't quite keep up. So this does allow for that gap, which is good. This is a good bill. However, when you're installing, I want it to specify that we're dealing with the new equipment that will be installed in a remodel and new construction, a new refrigerator that comes in. All of those manufacturers are actually going to meet the federal standards, and our code books haven't actually caught up. So that's fine. That's a good part of the bill. I want to make sure that we're only, that we don't get hamstrung in servicing the old equipment, that we can still use the old refrigerants that piece of equipment does take, so that you don't have to upgrade an old piece of equipment to brand new just because the motor goes out or something like that. So by specifying a new piece of equipment, that I think does that. And I just want to, because servicing these chillers, these refrigerators, all of this stuff is it's a big thing. It's a big part of what HVAC contractors do. I want to make sure that we're not limiting this in some way. I think this just adds the clarity that's needed when we're dealing with new codes, new equipment. Thank you.
All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 140 signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 140 has failed. Just a quick comment, when somebody's speaking at the mic, don't walk right in front of them, and don't be speaking to somebody else on the floor right in front of whoever's speaking at the mic. It's not courteous. With that, Senate, what was that? Oh, division. All right, all those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 140, please stand. Thank you. All those opposed, please stand. Thank you. Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 140 has failed, 25 to 36. Senate File 140, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Allemand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Plouston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Warnock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermueller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? I'm sorry? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwaniter Dan? Zwaniter Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Larson JT, no to aye. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 53 aye, 9 no.
Senate File 140, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 140 has passed the House. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 169.
Senate File 169, sponsored by Senator Hicks. State Shooting Complex Task Force, an act relating to the administration of government being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 169 and ask for your favorable consideration, members. So this is a little bit narrower. We heard consideration that we don't want to automatically exclude all of the locations that could be covered by all of the members. So instead, this has been changed to say, if there is a recommendation for your own specific community as a legislator, if you're on the task force, it's just a conflict. So it does still make a little bit of consideration of just not trying to have the people on the committee push for their own community specifically, and work for the best community for everyone involved. So again, I ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Washut for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a gentle pushback. I think that whoever's on this committee is going to be seeking the best possible facility in the best possible location, wherever that might be. Further, this top idea of conflict has particular meaning in the legislature. When we declare a conflict, it's because we are benefiting individually, financially from a potential vote that we're taking, and that we're not part of a larger class that might also be benefiting from that vote. And so to put in our statutes that a legislator must declare a conflict on a vote like this suggests that the individual legislator is receiving some pecuniary gain. And I just resist that idea, and I urge you to vote no on the amendment.
Representative Banks for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we resisted an amendment like this yesterday, and just as the good chairman of judiciary said, we don't need to limit good possibilities of the location of the shooting complex just because the community has a representative that's on that task force or that committee. So limiting the scope where we can have this big economic a benefit to that community or that area, I don't think should be limiting. And the fact that we have a conflict, we wouldn't be getting anything personally, no gain, no increase personally, if that complex was to go into our community. So I don't think that this raises a conflict, and if anything, we're here to speak on behalf of our communities. And if this is going to bring a benefit, then I expect the members of that task force to fight and argue on behalf of their community. So I urge a no vote on this amendment as well. Thank you.
Representative Penn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would be opposed to this amendment as well. If this task force is going to have 12 different people on it, that means there's 12 people from potentially 12 different communities, all of which who might have secondary gains from this coming to their own community and would equally have opportunity to lobby harder for it to be in their community. And so I don't think preventing legislators from voting in its decision-making process is a good idea. So I would be opposed to this.
Chairman Olson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm on and against the amendment. I have heartburn with the idea that through the amendment in law, we would declare when a conflict exists. Our conflicts are not governed necessarily through statute, but through our own rules. And what's particularly important about our conflict rules is that it's an individual choice. So we leave it up to the individual representative in their own conscience to decide whether they have a conflict or not. And I think that if we start to put this into statute, and it's going to send us down, it's a slippery slope. It's going to send us down a path where if we want a particular outcome or we don't want a particular outcome, we can statutorily declare conflicts. And so that gives me a little bit of heartburn. I think at the end of the day, if a representative on the task force fought for this to be in their community, they're going to have to come back and face the body on that, and the body's going to have to either decide whether that person was in the right or the wrong, irrespective of whether there's a conflict or not. So just urging a no vote.
Representative Pendergraph for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On an opposed conflict, obviously, is if there's some sort of a personal involvement in this. And it seems to me that this amendment would set a precedent that a representative of the 9,000 people in his district would then become voiceless, and that's contrary to why we're all here. Thank you.
Representative Singh for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for this amendment, I believe with a project of this magnitude, it's important that we try to remove as much bias as possible in the decision-making when it comes to this task force, and considering that it's possible for multiple members of the same community to be assigned to this task force, I only think this is right in making the best decision. Thank you.
Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just friendly notice to the body, this isn't codified law, so this doesn't go in our green books or our statutes. This is only the task force, and so don't get too concerned that we're putting some kind of conflicting statutes into place. And I would just encourage you, if you're going to be on this task force, don't bring it back to your home community, because that will turn into a real war on the floor, as we've seen in previous years. You probably don't want to be on this task force if you think there might be any possibility of this coming to your home community, because that would, I think, influence and affect how the rest of us see that the process went. So just a caution there.
Representative Larson JT for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, first for a second.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd just like to welcome everybody to next year's session where we debate this entire thing all over again, like I said we were going to do in the first time around. So once we're done debating this, this is where I would say on or against the amendment, just against the bill. Thanks.
I got to go back to the bringer of the amendment. So anybody else for their first time, anybody for their second time prior to the sponsor? Chair or Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, you know, I get this heartburn over the word conflict, but just to point out what the good chairman of Labor Health said, this is session law. And again, this is a body that will only exist for the existence of the body, and that word will only exist for the existence of this task force, which is a separate body than us as a legislature. So it just has, the only meaning it has is the meaning in that task force. And again, this is really just to prevent us from having the heartburn that we will have on the floor when a recommendation is put in place, because there will be bias seen if a member of the task force ends up having their own community being put on the recommendation. This helps eliminate some of that bias to make sure that, you know, the rest of the committee basically says, we do think this community is good. So I would urge you to help to adopt this amendment, just to make sure that we don't have such a nasty fight on the floor whenever that recommendation comes out. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 169 signify by saying aye. All those opposed? No. Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 169 has failed. Senate File 169 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Allemand, Allred, Andrew, Angelos, Banks, Bear, Berger, Brown, Burkhart, Byron, Chadwick, Chestick, Klauston, Conrad, Crago, Davis, Eklund, Haraldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hornock, Jennings, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson JT, Lawley, Locke, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Nemec, Northrup, Oakley, Obermueller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Pendergraft, Penn, Provenza, Rodriguez Williams, Sherwood, Singh, Slagle, Smith, Stith, Storer, Strock, Stivar, Tarver, Trujillo, Walters, Ward, Washit, Western, Winter, Wiley, Yin, Zwanzer Dan, Zwanzer Dave, Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? Andrew, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 51 aye, 11 no.
Senate File 169, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 169 has passed the House. Do we have any reports from standing committees? Reports from standing committees.
Senate File 136, sponsored by Senator Beitman. Property tax relief, assessment rate reduction, an act relating to taxation. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 3 revenue, to whom is referred Senate File 136 engrossed, property tax relief assessment rate reduction, respect the report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Bear, Byron, Locke, Northrup, Oakley, Strock. Noes, Representatives Harshman, Storer, and Zwanitzer. Representative Harshman, Chairman.
We have a re-referral on that. Vice Chairman Oakley. That would be a re-referral on Senate File 136.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move, I think, to re-refer Senate File 136 to Committee Number 2 Appropriations.
Without objection, Senate File 136 is re-referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. More standing committee reports, please.
Senate File 72, sponsored by Senator Larson. Employees forced, microchip implantation prohibited, an act relating to labor and employment. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred Senate File 72 engrossed, employees forced, microchip implantation prohibited, respect the report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Klauston, Hornock, O'Hearn, Penn, Trujillo, Ward, Zwanitzer. Noes, Representatives Chadwick, Yin. Representative Zwanitzer, Chairman.
Okay, we are at that order of business of consideration of joint conference committee reports. Chairman Washit, I think you have a report on that committee. This would be on House Bill 14.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move message number 305. Your conference committee has met and failed to agree on a report. We request that a second free committee be appointed to try and reconcile the effective date of the bill.
Okay, thank Thank you, Chairman Washer. Would you come up here to the, up here for a second? So, joint, so appointing to, for Joint Conference Committee number 2 on House Bill 14 will be Olson Chair, Nymick, and Washit. Maybe that was Nemec. Thank you. The next joint conference committee for our consideration is Joint Conference Committee number 1 on House Bill 9. And this is House Bill 9. I'm looking here. I see probably Chairman Oakley would be my guess. Chairman Oakley.
I apologize, Mr. Speaker. So I move concurrence, the concurrence report for House Bill 9, the Senate Message 298.
So, Chairman Oakley, that would be move message number 298 to Joint Conference Committee Report number 1.
Yep, wasn't ready.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Speaker, I move Senate Message number 298 to Joint Conference Committee number 1. And I can go ahead.
Please proceed.
So I would ask for your favorable consideration. The Senate conceded with our position.
Well, we are voting on the Joint Conference Committee number 1 on House Bill 9. A majority of the elected members is required. The chief clerk will please call the roll.
Elliman. Allred. Andrew. Angelos. Banks. Bear. Berger. Brown. Burkhart. Byron. Chadwick. Chestick. Clauston. Conrad. Conrad. Crago. Davis. Eklund. Harrelson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Warnock. Jennings. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke. Nyman. Newsom. Nicholas. Nemec. Northrup. Oakley. Obermuller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith. Storer. Strock. Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washit. Western. Winter. Wiley. Yin? Swanser Dan? Swanser Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Store? Closing vote? Vote closed. 58 aye, 2 no, 2 excused.
By your vote, you have voted to adopt Joint Conference Committee Report Number 1 to House Bill 9. Chief, do we have a few enrolled acts we could get through in the next few minutes? We'll do that. We're at that order of business of signing enrolled acts. The first enrolled act for our consideration is House Enrolled Act Number 65. The reading clerk will read the enrolled act.
House Enrolled Act Number 65, being original House Bill 188, an act relating to agriculture, recreating a gray wolf depredation compensation program, imposing additional duties on the Department of Agriculture, requiring rulemaking, providing for termination of the program as specified, providing an appropriation, and providing for effective dates, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
I am about to sign House Enrolled Act Number 65, being original House Bill Number 188. I have so signed. Congratulations, Representative Winters. I like to see a smile on that guy's face. If I don't see it in the morning, I worry. The next enrolled act for our consideration is House Enrolled Act Number 66. The reading clerk will read the enrolled act.
House Enrolled Act Number 66, being original House Bill 108, an act relating to children, prohibiting the sale of edible products and vaping products containing tetrahydrocannabinol to persons under 18 years of age, providing definitions, specifying penalties, exceptions, and affirmative defenses, making conforming amendments, and providing for an effective date, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
I am about to sign House Enrolled Act Number 66, being original House Bill Number 108. I have so signed. The next enrolled act for our consideration is Senate Enrolled Act Number 54. The reading clerk will read the enrolled act.
Senate Enrolled Act Number 54, being original Senate File 75, an act relating to corporations, amending statutory provisions, regulating decentralized autonomous organizations, providing a definition, and providing for an effective date, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
I am about to sign Senate Enrolled Act Number 54, being original Senate File Number 75. I have so signed. The next enrolled act for our consideration is Senate Enrolled Act Number 55. The reading clerk will read the enrolled act.
Senate Enrolled Act Number 55, being original Senate File 129, an act relating to criminal history records, authorizing the governor to obtain financial and criminal background checks as specified, and providing for an effective date, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
I'm about to sign Senate Enrolled Act Number 55, being original Senate File Number 129. I have so signed. The next enrolled act for our consideration is Senate Enrolled Act Number 56. The reading clerk will read the enrolled act.
Senate Enrolled Act Number 56, being original Senate File 148, an act relating to weapons, clarifying the applicability of the preemption of firearms regulation by the state as specified, and providing for an effective date, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
I am about to sign Senate Enrolled Act Number 56, being original Senate File Number 148. I have so signed. Chief, is that about all we got there? Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Wasn't standing next to a microphone. Mr. Speaker,
Please.
move the House stand adjourned until 2 p.m.
Any committee announcements? I would assume committee number 2 has something. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 2 will meet on adjournment to hear the re-referral from what we just got. 133, I think. 143.
Okay. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I apologize. We're not adjourned. We are in recess until 2 p.m.
Well, that was hopeful thinking, wasn't it? Chairman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your House, Committee Number 7, House Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions will meet upon noon recess to consider 2 bills, Senate File 127, the Wyoming Stable Token Act, and Senate File 134, Right to Farm Real Estate Disclosures.
Chairman Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 1 will meet on Monday morning at 8 o'clock in meeting room number 5, to discuss interim topics.
Chairman Northrup.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 4, Education, will meet upon noon recess in the Capital Extension 3. We're going to hear 1 Senate file, number 132, study of K-12 education program.
All right, you've heard the Majority Floor Leader's motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. We stand in recess until 2 p.m.